So, if I asked you to define what a family is, I want you to think about that definition. I oftentimes ask my classes to do this when we're together in person. And I have to say, granted, I get all sentimental all the time about everything, but the definitions that groups come up with are so beautiful about love and companionship and togetherness and all kinds of things. And so, the most amazing thing about a family is you can define it any way you want. So, despite cultural differences all around the world and even in our country, every human group in the world has organized its members into families. And really, what a family is people who consider themselves related. And so, keep in mind that word consider. So, you can consider um, a best friend to be like family to you. You can consider extended family members. You can consider neighbors to be like cousins and all kinds of things. You get to define who it is you want in your family and who you need in your family. But the family as an institution is key to the survival of society. And so, what I want to do is share with you the functions, the societal functions of the family, like the larger idea of family as a social institution. And so, one of those aspects is economic production. Families that create workers, right? They raise people who grow up and work in the economy. The other aspect of economic production is families need a lot of different things, which creates a reason for economic production. Protection. If you were to have someone come by and drop off a baby in a carrier who is like 2 months old, could you just leave that baby there and say, okay, bye, baby? Like, do you not take care of them, right? Not at all. We can't even imagine that because the baby needs food and attention, diaper changes, all these things. I want you to think about what age could you leave a child? And so that's the idea of protection. We, I think, as a society, consider that we need to really, truly hands on protect a child until probably 12, 13 ish, right? And so families are providing protection for our young. Socialization of children. So, if we go back to all the social norms and things, so many of those are what we learn from our families. Care of the sick and aged. Interesting things that are happening in our society. They're researching and finding that people in young adults and the generations to follow very well might be caring for aging parents for as many or more years as they're even raising children. And so families do a bulk of the labor as far as caring for the sick and aged to the tune of billions upon billions of dollars each year of effort. We've discussed the second shift in this course, and so sometimes researchers are calling this the third shift, the third level of care work that needs to be done, taking care of aging family members. There's recreation. So if you think about who goes out to dinner together, goes to the movies, if we went over to Disneyland right now, who is there? Families. Sexual control, not really something you would necessarily always think of in relation to family, but thinking about how we define family, siblings, cousins, things of that sort, that's actually an element of sexual control that is not necessarily always present in other aspects of the animal kingdom. So we are defining who a family member is and what that means as far as sexuality. And then finally, reproduction. People and families have children. And so society counts on that. When we talk more about population in my courses, we look at the changing population around the globe. And so when you think about the fact that you need to, if two people, it takes two people to create a child, if those two people do not have two people, you can have your population destabilized. And so if you're not having a population that's having, 2, 3 kids per family, you're going to lose workers, you're going to lose people paying into a system, and then you're going to have family members become old or aging and retired. And so you need to have a society that has a balance, that has enough workers to support the rest of society. So we constantly hear the term nuclear family, and I'm guessing you know who's in a nuclear family, right? It's a very heteronormative model, and that means male, female. So it's a mom and a dad, it's 2.3 kids, it's, the dog and the house and everything. And nowadays, our nuclear families are not necessarily defined in these manners. And so we have all different kinds of people. And so this is actually pictures of my family that I talk through more extensively when I teach sociology of the family. But I have a small family, my husband and my son. My son is going to not be pleased that I'm still using a picture from like his, 12 and 13-year-old heyday of fashion choices that I think we all have, right? If I were showing a picture of myself at 12 or 13, I'd be cringing too. We have extended family. I have my in-laws and my brother and sister-in-law. We have blended families. So my husband is my son's stepdad, and I'm raising Mac, my son, with my husband, but I'm also raising him with his dad. So his dad and I honestly were dating in high school. And so we had Mac really young. And so that means his dad's entire family, which is multi generational, is part of Mac's life. And together we create a whole family for Mac. Um, my mom has such a good friend, her best friend, Connie. Connie is like an aunt to me, like no other aunt that I've had. And so that idea of the family members, and we always consider with ourselves with family, Connie's family, that we're family. And so that idea of reaching out into your social circle and creating family members from there. You can have, again, like I said, blended families. My parents were separated. My dad actually got remarried a year after I did, so a bunch of years ago now. And so I have a stepsister, and you can see in that lower left-hand photo, I have a sister, a stepsister. I also have another half-sister who is 29 years younger than I am. So I am currently 41 and she just turned 12. And so that kind of multi generational aspect. My dad is raising a child that's only a year or two older than my sister's kids. And so they're very much peers in parenting right now, whereas I'm the outlier because I have a young adult. You can have siblings that you are raised with all the time. I always kind of joke that I'm the oldest of three, but then I have my other sisters and stuff. I even have a sister that, quite honestly, I didn't even meet. The lower right-hand corner photo in the middle is a half sister that I didn't meet until adulthood. So families come in all different shapes and sizes. And the only reason I'm talking you through a little bit about my family and showing you these photos is because I want you to think of the family that you have. And so the different connections that you've been able to make. I think it's always really important, and I want to always share this when discussing family, that a lot of times we treat family with all kinds of, stars and hearts and rainbows and puppies, and everybody's happy, and it's a place of love and joy. That's not necessarily always the case in families, right? And so I think it's always important to acknowledge that family can be a place of a lot of stress and strain, a lot of heartache for a lot of individuals. And so it's not necessarily always the happiest place, but you certainly, I would imagine, no matter how you've developed relationships in your life, been able to find some great meaning in them. So, moving on to a little bit of parenting, I want to share one parenting theory with you. Again, I'm kind of going through a bunch of different little random bits to put together this lecture so you have a little taste of various aspects of studying family. And so, I have a quick question. Are children wildflowers that develop naturally, or is it like tending to a garden? So, if you think about wildflowers, they need sun, they need water from rain, and they will grow, they will bloom, they will thrive. A garden takes more micromanagement, right? So I have a tomato garden right now, and I carefully picked out my 9 varieties. Don't judge me. I have a lot of tomatoes. Don't judge me when I tell you I don't really even like to eat tomatoes, but I really like to give them away. And so I study all different kinds. I think about when they produce, like early producers, mid producers, late producers in the season, all these different, how to grow them. We're trying to grow them in sand this year. What kind of fertilizers? That's a garden, right? You're researching, you're micromanaging, you're trying to figure out the way to have it organized and successful, and it's much more beyond just light and water. It's thinking through, you're pulling weeds, you're doing all this kind of stuff. And so the reason I'm asking you this random question about gardening is because I want to introduce to you 2 different parenting types that are based upon that kind of idea of either wildflowers or tending to a garden. And so a woman by the name of Annette Leroux did research on families in a time that perceptions of families and differences in families were very much focused on racial and ethnic differences. So they were assumed that it was racial and ethnic differences that created differences in parenting techniques. And so Annette Lareau came through and studied this and realized that not only was it various racial, cultural, ethnic differences, that social class had an inordinate amount of influence on the way that people parented their children. And so she developed a typology that has two aspects that I want to share with you. The first one is called concerted cultivation, and this is the garden model. So you can see a beautifully curated garden, and this is middle-class families. And so in concerted cultivation, children's cognitive and social skills are fostered, and they're oftentimes fostered with extracurricular activities. So the idea of trying to think about how to create a well-rounded child, you want to make sure that they're succeeding in school. Maybe they need a math tutor. You want to make sure that they are involved in the arts. So maybe, an art class or ballet or something along those lines. You want to make sure that they're active and strong, so maybe baseball or soccer or something along those lines. But looking for different ways for children to find their talents and to grow in their talents. Other parts of concerted cultivation are children and parents have discussions and often negotiate. So there's a lot of talking and a lot of discussing what children want. Children have a voice, an active voice when being parented in a concerted cultivation manner. And so if you were to use an example of what this might look like, if you were to say to a child, it's 7:55 p.m., bedtime's in 5 minutes, that child who might be playing a video game or watching a TV show might start to try and negotiate. Oh, I'll brush my teeth in just a minute. Can I just finish? Can I just get to this level? Can I just, finish the last few minutes of my show or whatever it is? I promise I'll, go extra fast or brush my teeth really well. That idea of negotiation, and parents are open to this level of negotiation. And so this can actually kind of backfire because it can instill a robust sense of entitlement in children. Children do not necessarily see parents in such a definitive, authoritative way. And so a child walking around and growing up to become an adult with a sense of entitlement, that does not serve them very well. Coming in thinking, well, I'm going to, tell you what I want and I'm going to make this happen. Yeah, that's not necessarily the best. The other critique that Annette Lareau has of middle-class families, because she's very good about balancing her critiques, because a lot of times in our society, we always feel that middle class indicates for any reason that something's better, and that's not necessarily better in this case. The other aspect of concerted cultivation that can be problematic is with all those extracurricular activities, children have a highly scheduled life where they might not even know what to do with themselves if they ended up with free time because they're going from one organized activity to the next. They don't get the chance to kind of indulge in imaginative play and just enjoy running around and having to be creative to figure out how to entertain yourself because you always have, a level of entertainment. So the other aspect is accomplishment of natural growth, which is working class families. And this is the wildflowers. So you can see beautiful wildflowers growing on the hill, growing out in the hills. And so this is where families are working hard to provide comfort, food, and shelter. These are families who are struggling oftentimes financially, and that means that an inordinate amount of effort can go into trying to provide comfort, food, and shelter. Just around us here in Orange County, as I'm sure you have a sense of, a one-bedroom apartment. I believe the local newspaper was just discussing last week a person needs to be making $27 an hour to afford a one-bedroom apartment here in Orange County. And so that is not necessarily available to people who are working minimum wage positions. And so that idea of working hard to provide comfort, food, and shelter, I think a lot of times in a society that's always focused on middle-class lifestyles, we forget how hard it can be to even achieve the basics in our society. So with the accomplishment of natural growth model, parents view the child's development as unfolding spontaneously. I will feed them, I will love them, I will protect them, they will grow, they will go to school, we will figure it out. It is not all about micromanagement, about trying to find all the ways for this child to grow up being an extra amazing person with all these extra amazing talents, that a child would develop naturally based upon the care and concern that the parents are giving. Accomplishment of natural growth parents tend to use more directives. If you go back to the example I gave about a child negotiating at 7:55 p.m. about going to bed, if you were to say to a child with an accomplishment of natural growth technique, 7:55, bedtime's in 5 minutes. But mom, I don't want to go to bed. Why do I have to go? Do you know what the answer is? I think you do. I'm sure you've heard it at some point from your parents. Because I said so. What I say goes. It's not up for negotiation. You need to go to bed. And so that is kind of the idea of tending to use more directives. And then finally, because of the use of more directives, there's a clearer boundary between children and adults. So there's not as much open negotiation. You can see that the adult is the adult, and what the adult says goes, and you don't question. The one drawback of this is ultimately when the child grows up, they have grown up learning that no means no, which is not necessarily always the best thing out in society, to think no means no, because you might hear no from a physician or from a medical group approving something that you need, or possibly an educator, taking care of your children. So there are some times that you shouldn't have necessarily a sense of entitlement, but that you do need to speak up and try to negotiate on your own behalf. And so it's not necessarily always the best for somebody to think, oh, well, that teacher said no, there's no possibilities for my child to get extra help after school. I guess that means no, as opposed to really trying to think about what other possibilities there might be, or feeling comfortable asking more questions. Moving right along to a different aspect of families, I want to talk about siblings. And so I'd love for you to think about where you were born in birth order in your family, whether it was the firstborn, a middle child, the youngest, or maybe an only child. I was a firstborn. So I mentioned I'm the oldest of three. And so when I'm in class again with students, will actually divide the class up into groups of firstborn, middle children, younger children, only children, and they discuss the various attributes that they feel about that they have. So maybe somebody says, oh, I'm really impatient. Oh, I'm really organized. Oh, I really am friendly and outgoing and love all my friends. And so what they do is they discuss the positive attributes they have about themselves, the negative ones. Then they discuss the negative attributes and the positive ones about their younger siblings, or maybe if it's the middle child, their older siblings and younger siblings, or if they're the youngest, their older siblings. And so it usually kind of turns into, and I have to admit, I get on kind of like a little sibling warfare, where, oh, that's right, you all are such tattletales, and oh my goodness, my, older sister is so bossy, that kind of thing. But the truth of it is that our socialization as our birth order, as being the firstborn, middle, youngest, or only child, actually goes along with us for the rest of our lives. And so I want to take you through some attributes that researchers have found that are attributed to the firstborn, middle child, only child, and youngest child. So the firstborn is conscientious. They can be very cautious. They like to be in control. They can be organized and dominant in relationships. And things you want to keep in mind when parenting the firstborn is that because they're the oldest, they can always do the most. And so don't necessarily always instill like the, go, do more kind of thing. A lot of times the firstborn is socialized in a manner because parents are so hyper vigilant about the firstborn and always trying to push and do better because, it's their first child. And so that can kind of backfire a bit. With the middle child, they can be people pleasers. They're very agreeable. They're good at compromise. They're the peacemaker, but they can be secretive because when you think about it, to keep people happy and to be a peacemaker, you can't always speak your mind. And so that secretiveness might come from them not really speaking about how they really feel. And so things to keep in mind when parenting the middle child is the first child is domineering, right? And so because they can speak more, they can do more because they're older. And so really making sure that the middle child feels a place in the family where they can make decisions. We always joke, right, as a society that the middle children get forgotten, but that can kind of be true. And so another thing to keep in mind is if you did a lot of great documenting of your firstborn and lots of pictures and maybe a journal and things of that sort, to make sure that you keep that family album updated with your middle child. So the youngest, the babies in the family, can be fun-loving, they're natural charmers, they're uncomplicated, they're outgoing, but they can be undisciplined. And so things to keep in mind when parenting your youngest child would be to make sure that they get an opportunity to contribute to the family. Again, they might not be able to do as many chores or things just because of their age, but to make sure that you find something that they can do so that they know that everybody contributes. And then finally, only children can be mature for their age, they're perfectionists, they can be diligent leaders, and can struggle with other kids. So, things to keep in mind when parenting an only child is that a lot of times you can focus in too many resources. If you only have one child to spend money on, you might really spoil them a heck of a lot. And then to keep in mind that you want to make sure that they are spending a lot of time with their peers, that you're scheduling a lot of play dates. And then finally, to keep in mind that it goes really fast. When you only have one child, you're only parenting for, 18 or so years. Whereas if you have two or three children, depending on the age gaps, you might be parenting for a lot longer altogether. Now, there's some exceptions to the firstborn, middle child, youngest children, and I go around the room usually when my students are working and kind of quiz them, like, how many are you the oldest of? Or when you're saying you're the middle child, like, are you really like the middle out of three, or is it because you're the second out of four, or are there any age gaps in your family? Because sometimes somebody will be a youngest child, but let's say their two older siblings are 10 and 12 years older than they are. Well, that can kind of alter their socialization. Yes, they're still the youngest child in their family, but because it's been such a long time since the family's had little children, they might be kind of a little bit of a hybrid so that they're the youngest child, but they also might kind of be socialized in a way that is like an only child or maybe firstborn. So here are the exceptions. If there are several years in between, the rule is five. Once you have five or more years in between siblings, you can kind of start over. Another aspect is if their first and second born children are different genders, you might be the second born in your family, but you're the first boy. And so then you might then have two children that are kind of socialized both as the firstborn. Twins. So twins are funny. I've had twins that are like two twins, the twin siblings, taking my class together. And so I've split them up for this activity. I've done it 2 or 3 times. And they fall right in, even though they're only born a few minutes apart. Like, oh, one's the oldest and one's, the youngest or the middle child. But a lot of times in a bigger family, or even if it's just the twins in the family, they're treated as a unit. So, oh, the twins. And so that can kind of be disruptive. And then finally, blended families. To think about if my mom were to remarry and I have always been the oldest, let's say she remarried someone that had two kids older than I was, then I've kind of been displaced from my oldest. Sure, I'm the oldest of my biological siblings, but I'm no longer officially the oldest in my family. They say that families don't necessarily always blend together, they kind of crash into each other. And so that can kind of be part of sibling socialization too. So I hope through discussing parenting techniques and sibling socialization and the family as a social institution, you've been able to see and listen along and think of a lot of examples in your own family, and you can kind of use this information in the future. One last thing I want to say about sibling socialization is I want you to think about your place in the family, first, middle, youngest only, but then what are your parents? So if your mom is an oldest child in her family and your dad's the youngest in his family, and let's say you're the youngest in your family, your dad is going to see more eye to eye with you, whereas your mom might perceive you as even more undisciplined or lackadaisical because she's been socialized as the oldest. And so these are really things that we've been discussing in this short time frame that you can utilize to analyze your own life and to kind of make decisions going forward.